when your goal is to fill a subscription package, you have very different creative needs than when your goal was to actually sell tickets against other people. The biggest thing I find is that individual projects get less scrutiny. It's more about volume.
This is Creative Disruption, the intersection where entertainment, data, and creativity meet. Here's your hosts, Ricky Ray Butler and Derral.
Welcome back to the Creative Disruption podcast. We are here talking with people that are disrupting the industry and also the technologies that are making waves. And I'm joined by my co-host, Ricky Ray Butler. How you doing, Ricky?
Hey, I'm doing fantastic. I almost didn't make it because I was on a Clubhouse session.
Clubhouse. I definitely want to talk about that for sure.
Hey, no, not really. But I feel like that's taking a lot of my time and attention these days. And I've also learned that you can't just, fall asleep to listening to it, or people call you out and ask you to say something. Which has happened twice now, so I have to.
Why would anybody want to talk to you, Ricky? I have no idea.
I think I have just a funny sounding name.
Oh, I think so. But do you want to introduce our guest?
I would want to ask Ricky questions about what it was like when he played for ZZ Top.
Hey, you're not the one asking questions, Chris. So,
Sorry.
But I have a ways to go to be like ZZ Top. We'll get there, maybe. We'll see. We'll see if my family can handle it. But but I'm really excited to have Chris on again, Chris Moore. Chris was our first guest when we first started Creative Disruption. He's been a renowned producer for like 3 decades now. He did Good Will Hunting, American Pie, Manchester by the Sea, and he was also the creator of Project Greenlight. And Chris, we're excited to have you here again. And we usually have good heated debates. I hope that's happening again today.
It depends. If you agree with everything I say, there won't be any good debates.
That's the truth. So how's life been?
Ricky doesn't even agree with himself sometimes. I mean, it's okay.
Fair enough.
That's a really good point. That's a really good point. I changed my opinion, but you know what? It's because I'm very data driven, not emotionally stubborn, like some people I know. Yeah, Derral. Did you catch it?
Is this really what this is about? Is you invite guests to mediate between the two of you as you work out your issues?
There is some truth to that, Chris. There really is. If it's not over this podcast, it's over lunch or dinner. But
Fair enough.
That's just the way it works.
But Chris, what's new? What's happened the last couple of years?
Well, the industry has changed so dramatically for the business that I used to be in, sort of telling stories, the move away on a creative level from movie type lengths to episodic type programming, the sort of, I personally think what people aren't talking about, some of it is that when your goal is to fill a subscription package, you have very different creative needs than when your goal was to actually sell tickets against other people. The biggest thing I find is that individual projects get less scrutiny. It's more about volume. So on one hand, for producers like me, it's a benefit because you're like, well, I can get anything made. On the other hand, I think honestly, we're making too much stuff. It's just too much out there. It's too hard. And I think these battles that are going on right now between the major media companies about how many subscription services can survive, who's going to do what, is it about, content exclusivity? Is it about other services? So I've been sort of spending a lot of my time with younger producers, other producers, trying to figure out how to do it because the deal structures have changed. The sort of way of doing business has changed, and marketing, has become the key. So talent is just continuing its meteoric rise to dominate every, sort of aspect of the business. Even in our conversations, Ricky, it's always like, find somebody who's got 10 million YouTube subscribers. You're like, Jesus, back in the day, you mentioned Good Will Hunting or American Pie, not a frickin' famous person in it. Right? Like, we were creating stars. We could have people no one ever heard of, and you could still make a movie and people would go see it. You know?
Well, Chris, I got some questions because, I mean, a lot. I don't think that the world understands the impact of what's actually happening in film and television in the last 2 years, especially with COVID. And I mean, just having AMC, be able to not necessarily show films as frequently as possible, and other venues like that, that creates a pretty big ripple effect. And I know that when I watched Wonder Woman 1984, it was on HBO Max, and it wasn't in the theater. And I still felt chipped from that movie. Don't get me wrong on that one, but it's just like, I felt like, all right, whatever. And I think that you brought up a valid point, but what is happening in the industry? And you mentioned and alluded to it a little bit with, hey, we have to look at a different direction, but just because people are not thinking theatrical release first now, what is that doing to the industry right now?
Well, it's creating a massive economic change. And I don't know the audience exactly of your guys' podcast, but the entire entertainment industry was built, I would even include music, games, other things, there's an opening window. Every piece of new content, their economics was built on how it worked as an opening window, right? So in movies, it was theatrical release. Television, it was premiere, and then it was premiere +3, and now it's premiere +7. And the problem is all of that was based on individual content success, meaning that a hit, what is a hit, right? This is a hit-driven business, was easy to quantify. We'd build a system around hits, right? The problem is that now you can't really do that. There's very few things that draw people's attention in a specific window of time like it used to. So my gut is beyond your story of, you didn't like it 1984 on HBO Max. You probably didn't watch it that first Friday either.
No,
because you knew it was on. You knew it was on HBO Max, yep. And you were like, I don't need to watch it this weekend, and I'm not. And it may be because of COVID. It may be because of what's changing in the world. I personally am a little bit of a pessimist that the theatrical window and what I'm calling in public the premiere window is going to keep shrinking. It's going to keep going down. And so how it affects it is budgets change, the sort of level of talent. There was a movie recently, and I'm not disparaging any of this talent, but that was touted by Netflix as one of their #1 movies over the holidays. I think it was called Holidate or something like that. It was a little romantic comedy with Emma Roberts. That movie is great for Netflix. But if I went out and tried to put together a theatrical release around Emma Roberts in a romantic comedy that cost $18 million, people would be like, you've lost your mind, right? Who's going to the theater for that? And that's what's really changed is the drive. Yet the Netflixes and the Amazons and now, the other streamers will say they want stars. But in my opinion, they only want stars if they can get them cheap. They only want stars if, it's going to help them with their boss. It doesn't seem to really matter. And again, Ricky may know, you may know whether the algorithms are reporting. It gets attention on the streamers, but ultimately people don't seem to be watching stuff. I mean, there's not a person you've ever heard of in Bridgerton, right? And 80 million people saw that according to Netflix.
Yeah, and I think... Yeah, and I think, too, this is a really big deal because, doing it from a theatrical release, there's actually contracts of residuals and everything that happens there. This is being disrupted on that platform. I don't even know. I know that there's renegotiation and trying to get some settlement stuff going on because of just what's happening in the landscape. But I think, too, the best point that you've made is the quality level has gone down. I look at Adam Sandler on Netflix, and I'm an Adam Sandler fan. I think he does an amazing work. I think he's had some amazing hits, but like he wanted to make the worst movie ever made in the history of all mankind. What was it, like Hubie Halloween or something like that? it was like really bad, but everybody watched it. And it was just like one of the worst shows that ever existed. But it's like, what do you do? There's a new movie on Netflix, or you can go back to the
but
stuff
then
he's
redeemed himself with cut gems, and being a part of that project. But yeah, I mean, some of those Adam Sandler shows it's kind of like, you guys remember Ernest?
Yeah.
Kevin and Ernest
Yeah,
brothers
exactly.
are pumping out, a bunch of cheap content because they know some people are going to watch it. And,
Yep.
and
What's up, Vern?
See, for me, my habits have changed drastically, in the last year. So I love film, and I'm always having to make the decision: am I going to continue to watch one of these series that I'm binge watching, or do I watch a movie? And sometimes that goes through my thought process is, okay, well, I can always watch this movie. I'll get to it. And the truth is, I haven't watched as many films this last year. And a lot of it's also because I haven't traveled. Like, a lot of times now when I watch a film, I like to do it alone. I like to do it without my kids. And I usually do it on an airplane. I have not been flying. And
Which
so,
is a disaster for guys like me. There's nobody who's at home going, boy, I really got to make a movie for Ricky on a plane. We're just like, no.
I'm not necessarily a target, but I love
I'm hoping you have an 85-inch TV and surround sound in one of your rooms somewhere.
Well, yeah, what it comes down to is, am I going to binge something that I've been watching, that I've invested in, or do I watch something that's new where, it's gonna, I'm not gonna be as loyal to that cast, but I'm gonna really enjoy the art, and so that's where it's been kind of weird for me, and so I've kind of literally made it a goal that monthly I have a list of films I want to take time to watch.
Well, I would say that it's one step further, and this is going to sound ridiculous, but I had a college do a tiny bit of psychological research on this exact issue of binging versus movies, and there is an actual psychological or whatever concept called attachment, and attachment is sort of when you as a person you like you said, a group of characters, a place. Like I've been watching these sort of Finnish, Danish, Swedish shows on Netflix, and I want to go there, even though I probably hate it because it's 5 degrees and whatever. But the point is, you fall in love with these characters. And what somebody said to me, which I thought was really smart, was an episodic thing is like a loyalty program. It's like when you have your miles at American and you say, well, I got to get a flight. Oh, but I get a better seat, or I can get whatever because I have miles at American, right? In television or in entertainment, it's loyalty. Well, I know those things. And that's why, like, Mission Impossible, you could argue, is an episodic show. They're just $200 million episodes. Right? And it's still Tom Cruise, but I'm going to watch that next one because I like Tom Cruise as Ethan Hunt. I like that kind of genre, and it's less of a risk, right? And so you're on your list, you're probably going to say Mission Impossible, right? I would argue in today's world, Mission Impossible is serialized 90-minute shows, right? It's not really what you would call a movie, whereas Good Will Hunting, right, is a movie. We're never going to make a sequel to it. I doubt anyone's going to remake it in Good Will Hunting 2025. And so that was American Pie became serialized. There's been 8 of them now because the new one just came out straight to streaming. But the point is that attachment concept to a brand, to a group of characters, is very powerful in this world. And when you have a streaming service, you can play into that a lot more than you can when you're releasing things theatrically. But it's why, 5-6 years ago, everybody's complaining, well, all the studios do is make sequels. Well, why do they fucking make sequels? Why do they make sequels? Because people already know the characters. Vin Diesel can't buy box office in another movie, but if he plays, the guy in Fast and the Furious, people love him. And that is a big difference, because streaming allows you to take advantage of that like no other technology or delivery process has ever done, except for DVD box sets, which were so far after the initial release originally. But you get people buying the whole Sopranos, or whatever, because they want to have all of it and they want to go back with, Tony and them. And now they're just on there. You don't have to buy them.
Well, I 100% agree. I think, James Bond and a few horror films have proved it over the years, and then it just kind of evolved. But I think the biggest disruption in serialized world is Marvel. And you look at the announcement this year of how many different Star Wars and Marvel things are coming out on Disney Plus. I mean, I swear I counted like 30 some odd movies that they're like, we're going to do this and this and this. And you're like, Eric, what's going on? And then they had a couple that were announced afterwards, like at the end of Mandalorian. And it's just like, wow. I mean, they literally are building on that universe, but it's like people are going to be more in tune to that because of that loyalty factor, and I think that's definitely the where the direction's going. But my question is it going to devalue the brand the more that they just kind of pump out content and they're not putting the quality and the money behind that?
Well, it's an interesting question, because it depends on your orders of magnitude, right? If Disney Plus still gets a lot of subscribers and doesn't lose any subscribers, they're going to keep spending less. Mandalorian's a lot cheaper than, the last movie, right? And that's what they'll look at it that way. I think for the consumer, it's going to be rough, because if you're really a fan and you like it, it can't help but diffuse it a little bit. And I think for the Kevin Feigs and the people who are in charge of managing this, it also means you spread the talent out a little bit, which, means it's not always the Russo brothers and that great cast. It's always other people and other things. Star Wars suffered that a little bit, even in their movies, where some were good and some were bad. And, there wasn't a consistency of, vision for all of it. Marvel, in my opinion, has done an unbelievable job in the current version of the MCU. I particularly am curious to see what happens going forward, because I do think you can burn something. You can wear it out. I mean, Batman, when I first came to Hollywood, Batman was Tim Burton, and then it was Joel Schumacher, and then it was all these people, and then people were just like, I can't watch another Batman. Like, you can't.
And then Batman Begins comes out, and it's the best Batman of freaking all time.
Chris Nolan reinvents it, but it was like 5 or 10 years, maybe even longer, 15 years later. And so it's almost a generational change. Disney may also have the advantage, which they've always had. I always joke that somewhere in the back room, there's a Disney executive who talks like Matthew McConaughey from Dazed and Confused. I love it. I keep getting older, but tweens keep staying the same age. So, they just keep programming, and those people grow out and the next wave grows in. But for more mature things or other things, it changes. And I think James Bond, you brought that up, is one of the best examples of being able to stay current and change a little bit. They've had different actors, different people. You watch some of those Pierce Brosnan ones now, and they just feel sort of over the top, but I liked them then. But the Daniel Craig one's totally different. Then you go way back to Sean Connery, and that guy's hitting women square in the face. Like, it was so out of it. You're just like, but in some ways it's a great marker. But back to your point of how it changes the business is now everybody who's in my position, who's trying to be an independent producer, trying to be a studio producer, or any of these groups, the streamers, are trying to have their loyalty worlds, right? And that's why I think Disney has done so well, and I would keep betting on Disney in the streaming world, is because they had all these brands that people are totally loyal to. And and that's why they're at whatever, close to 100 million subscribers already. I don't know what happens with Peacock and HBO Max, because I'm not sure what's in that same category for them. And I really have no idea what happens on Paramount Plus or Discovery Plus or AMC. Like, I just don't believe Americans, or even worldwide, people are going to subscribe to all these things. So I don't know how the economics continues to work without this opening window where hits still drive enough economics for people to take bets.
I think we're going to see a shift, and this is me like really kind of digesting the history, but I think when you have a quality show like Game of Thrones, or you have like a House of Cards, that's going to even bring more people in. When people naturally talk about it online and in person, hey, have you seen this? That's what's going to be the next wave. So I think what Disney's going to do is they're going to clamp down and just do what's going to really kind of exhilarate their fan group. They're going to expand that out, go from there, and then two, I think that there will be more quality that actually comes into it, because to really keep someone, you can keep on putting it out and it's satisfied, but it's just, you have to get someone really involved, in a series like a Game of Thrones or a House of Cards or like a Breaking Bad type of content. And so it'll be very interesting. And I think the outlier, from my perspective, I think the ones that I think that are bringing really good quality shows out there is Amazon. I think Amazon's an outlier, and
no one's talking about 000. Have you guys heard of that series?
Yep.
It was a very expensive production, very well written, very well produced and filmed. It was in a bunch of locations, and no one's talking about it. But I've been evangelizing it because it's like one of my favorite shows of 2020, and it goes down to one thing. I love mafia, shows. I love that vertical. It's the reason why I watched the film The Irishman. And that's maybe one of those things as things become more decentralized. I still think the demand for content's out there, and I don't think there's anyone out there saying, "You know what? I'm satisfied. I've watched all the content I need to watch." I think if anything, people are making more time. And like this trend of binging is just going to keep happening and keep growing. But when it comes to new filmmakers and those that want to break out, they're not going to be able to work with like those heavy duty brands that like Disney owns, it's going to be difficult in a lot of ways to be able to break out. Do you think for new filmmakers to be on the rise, they need to find genres or verticals that are very popular, like mafia or gangster movies or horror films or faith-based films? Is finding that niche the way to really, get out there and maybe get an audience in the future, because there's just so many options. So maybe you focus on a category that that there's a pretty big base that's going to be willing to watch it.
Well, it's an age-old question. How do you launch new people? How do you, do stuff? I spend a lot of my time in this area right now. My career has a fair amount of people who I was part of them making their first projects. I think what I said earlier about people being more adventuresome with unknown things in the mainstream media is going to get less or less because the investment's too high to take a risk. You see even development funds are coming together where they literally say you have to be on your second or third movie before we'll consider working with you, because they don't want to be in the first time filmmaker business. But what I'd say is, and we haven't talked about this yet, we've been talking about the mainstream, but I think the YouTubes, the TikToks, these other platforms are another way to do it. And that my fantasy is that people will, as they start realizing what's the consistency between a Game of Thrones or between a Breaking Bad or between all those Marvel movies that they liked, they start valuing the writers and the directors and the creators and the people behind the camera a little bit more, right? So that I use sports as an analogy sometimes. Like an example for me is again, I believe athletes should be paid in college. So I'll just say that, and we're not talking about sports. But my point would be, in college football, the coaches get paid a shitload of money, right? And that's because they bring the best out of those young men who come and play football, right? And in the movie business, there are people who do great and at creating stuff and keep doing it, and they do it over time, and nobody really focuses on them. Right now, the media and everybody's still really focused on actors. And I think that we got to twist it a little bit so that people value that more. So then when somebody goes out and makes a small movie, or somebody creates something in a different way, like a short series, there's people that are doing series that are only 5 or 6 episodes long, right? Or, a story of the last 5 years, the show High Maintenance that started on Vimeo and then ended up on HBO. Those kind of things can create whole groups of talent. But I think film festivals are going to have a hard time after this COVID and whatever, because people have gotten used to being able to see it, and I don't know if that'll work. So I think a new bit of the industry will come out of people who are out looking and finding and pointing, but actually online building fan bases, sort of like what's happening in music. If you have new music, you put it out on Spotify, you put it out on one of the things, and if you get to a certain level, it starts to move forward and people start to hear of you. And then, that was the same way, ironically, like they always say, past is prologue or whatever, but like that's the way it was in the world when there were small clubs. You play music in Seattle and you find Nirvana or Soundgarden, and then you play music in Memphis and now those little areas like Seattle and Memphis are online. They're not, so people can find it all over and people then bubble up. I think that the technology will get to the place where that can happen in movies. There's a story, you guys may have studied. There's a movie, I want to say One Night, It Happened One Night, or it's young filmmaker made a kind of horror story about aliens and whatnot. And, he made it on his own and Netflix picked it up. And on one hand, he was really happy that Netflix picked it up. On the other hand, if you get picked up by Netflix, you get swallowed into that machine where they're releasing like 20, 30 new things a week. And he never really had a chance to come out. And so I liked the movie and people internally talked about it, but he himself didn't have a chance to build an audience. And what I tell young people now is you got to build a little bit of an audience for yourself, so that you can show people that you're also bringing marketing to the table. Because what doesn't get valued at the same level it used to is the ability to just deliver a good product. The experience, the skills. Ridley Scott's been making a career out of that for a long time. You give him a script, he's going to give you a good version of it. The movie, and whether it's good or bad, is going to depend to some extent whether it was a good script or not. We can all mention movies Ridley made that sucked and movies that really made. It's not because Ridley made them badly. It's because they started bad and then he just delivered. That guy, the young Ridley Scott right now, is going to have a lot of trouble moving up the ranks unless he goes out and builds sort of people who know who he is.
I think that's one of the underlining things of any great project, is that writing and the, getting the right vision that can go into that script. And I look at Christopher Nolan, but his brother Jonathan is like really, really good, and there's a lot of wealth. And then two, the Nolan brothers, I mean, they basically are using computers too to help, improve ideation of where that's going. And so I do believe to really break out, I do agree with you 100%. You're going to have to figure out where can you prove it socially that can kind of lead over to this other. If not, you're going to be drowning in so much competition out there that are subpar competition. It's just drowned because there's just so much. It's saturated.
Well, and it's a really different model right now, because in the case of the networks and the studios, when they were in a hit-driven model, they were on your side, right? If you made something good, they jacked the shit out of it. I mean, when we were making American Pie, there were some people thought we were making a porno. Some people inside Universal were like, we shouldn't even make this movie. Then it came out, then they saw it, they realized it's actually kind of sweet. They saw that it's a lot about the boys bonding and being afraid of going to college and whatnot, and it became a hit. And Universal could turn on the machine behind American Pie and say, let's go watch that. Netflix is never going to want to turn on the machine around one title, because their whole thing is about selling the platform, right? So they want you to come there. Yeah, they'll tell you, here's our top 10 list, or this is our thing. But they're not invested in making one thing way better than the other. And it's for two reasons. One is they don't want people to turn off Netflix when the good thing's over, right? They want them to keep Netflix. And the other is they don't want every piece of talent calling them up and saying, hey, I saw what you did for, The Irishman. Why the hell haven't you done that for my project? Well, your project sucks. Nobody wants to say that to a talent, right? That nobody's watching it. So the platforms create this change in the dynamic. And as a young person coming up, that's what you need, is someone's going to champion your project because it's good. And to some extent, and Harvey's a horrible person, and in no way am I saying this, but the existence of Miramax and a few other distributors back in the 90s were the example of this. They were out there finding individual projects, pushing those projects, then when they became successes, pushing those filmmakers and trying to make more projects with those filmmakers, right? Nobody has a vested interest in doing that right now. In fact, they're doing the opposite. They're putting big dollars behind people who've already been successful. So, I'm happy Shonda Rhimes came out with another hit for Netflix, but that's a tough business, is to keep making hits.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I wonder, is it going to be one of those things where there's less quality and it's going to be just too much saturation? Or is it, I believe it's actually going to be, the content's going to get better and better. There's going to be more competition. There's more decentralization. And then I think there's a good chance that the platforms are going to evolve based on the audiences that are watching those platforms. And so there's a lot of discussion about consolidation. I don't see that happening anytime soon. I think we're just at the very beginning of decentralization. And I think there's going to be, underserved communities that want to watch a certain type of film or a certain type of series that they maybe don't get enough content in that area. That's the reason why I believe YouTube exploded like it did at the very beginning. No one was catering to the gaming community, which is a huge community, or the beauty community. Or you could say even the LGBTQ community, or other genres, or target markets, or ethnicities, or minorities. There are a lot of things that had to come from decentralization, so people felt like they were able to watch content that was much more appealing to them, that they could be more passionate about. I think that's going to continue to happen with series, and I think also with film.
Well, this may be our big disagreement. I guess what the question becomes, Ricky, is what you mean by decentralization, because I think the expenses of running a worldwide streaming service are massive, right? So I think that if you're talking about, there will be channels. So what I look at now is more like the cable model, when people were selling cable and they bundled, right? And I think what Amazon's doing right now is the smartest thing that they can do. And I think in some ways Disney's doing the same thing. They offer the bundle, right? And they, for me, who has kids, who also likes, the Marvel stuff, Star Wars, and I love ESPN, I'm all for it. I still have no idea if I'll watch anything on Hulu, but I'm happy to get it to see if I can, which in my opinion is the same way when I bought my cable package and didn't give a shit about having AMC until they had, the vampire or whatever, the zombie show, right? So the point is that I don't know that those things, those markets you're talking about, can completely sustain themselves on their own. So the question will be, the thing that the cable providers did that, in my opinion, was smart, was they didn't get too involved in what the programming was. They said, look, we'll carry you, we'll pay you X amount of dollars. And we had sports and we had food and we had all kinds of stuff that became channels. And then the ones that got bigger ended up getting bought, right? And were part of a package. The question is whether in the internet business, those guys are going full bore right now after original programming. And they're saying to themselves, our way of standing out and justifying our monthly subscription is the original programming we have. The cable providers never had to do that because they all had all the channels. And their differentiation was around geography and around service and around, Amazon's the only one who's jumped into that race now. My question is, what happens if AMC Plus doesn't make enough money for them to have original programming anymore, or the original programming is, what A&E did, whatever, that live police department, whatever, what live PD or whatever, and that's their only channel, then they start not to be able to play, and then it gets smaller because there's only a few people making green light decisions. If through not having the costs of their own streaming service, their own other stuff, and they just become like, I think what BBC does with Amazon, what PBS does, that's the way it'll end up going. And these 5 or 6 others, that's why I hope somebody like Peacock or HBO Max or, decides, what, there's just no way it can be exclusive. And that's the thing that's so hard, is that in music, in books, in gaming even, the platforms aren't exclusive, right? They don't only support the stuff they make, right? Whereas in movies and television, it's the only one left. It didn't used to be, because we had windowing, right? They'd keep it exclusive for the first window, right? And then they'd let it go live wherever. But that's why I'm always amazed when I can buy a Netflix show on Amazon, right? I'm always like, wait, how is that possible? But you're like, well, because in Netflix's mind, it's so old now, they'd rather make the money of me paying for it than realizing I can go get it on Netflix. Or ESPN making The Last Dance with Netflix. I don't think ESPN will ever do that again, because they'll want The Last Dance to be on Disney Plus only or ESPN Plus only, right? But that creates a problem, I think, because then it becomes this margin business of you're only greenlighting content that has this size of a margin, whereas a lot of the content you're talking about, or when I'm going back to the days in the 90s when there were these independent distributors, or even guys today like A24 or Neon, these guys have to be working off of margins like this big, right? If you're at Disney or you're at Netflix, you walk in and say, look, it's a margin this big. They're just like, it's not worth it. We need the margin to be this big, and we're not, it doesn't matter. And so then what I worry is all those communities you just described become a quota business for the big streamers. We got to have so many LGBT. We got to have a couple gaming shows. We need to have 1 or 2.
Or maybe they cannot keep up with the growth that's going to happen in certain categories that they haven't put investment in. So I agree.
But you don't think they can just buy them when they prove that they have enough?
But it might get to the point where there's way too much out there. And there might be content that maybe does not fit, specifically on their platform. And so where I'm saying is, like, I think what you're saying, I agree 100% with. And I think that's going to continue to happen. And these, big companies and these platforms and these studios are always going to stay very relevant in funding content and growing what they're doing. And I think we're just seeing the very beginning of what Amazon's doing. However, I do think this next era, the next era of content is going to be where the content creators are going to be way more empowered, and specifically those that have influence and audiences. And so when it comes to monetization, sure, maybe they'll come out with a film every year, but that's not going to be the only thing that's going to be helping them monetize. They're going to be selling merch. They're going to be doing live streaming. They're going to be figuring out other ways of monetizing. They might even have limited series or ongoing series where they figure out how to be able to, produce content that's long form, in addition to, catering and consistently engaging with their captivated audiences that they're growing day after day. And so I think we're just starting to see the beginning of that. We know that you have, we've talked about this before. You have someone like an Ariana Grande that has well over 100 million followers. When she hooks up with the right person and with the right team and thinks like, okay, I want to have a film come out every year. She probably has enough influence and followers and distribution to have a successful film. Well, maybe if she's created her own platform where, she's able to live stream with her audiences and put out different forms of content, she's going to hopefully follow the data and optimize what she's doing and becomes more and more successful. And so I actually think there will be decentralization both with platforms and with different types of content. And I don't think film's going to be going anywhere. I don't think long form series are going to be going anywhere, but I do think there's going to be even more opportunity, but it's going to be coming from those that have the influence and that also have the resources to fund it themselves and to build around them a team that can help them do it and make it happen.
Well, and I think too, where it's going to get interesting is the Gen Z is not like any other generation that's ever existed. And the way that they actually consume content and media is different. And so for me, it's like, I do agree it's going to be around personality based more than anything else, because that's what they're used to. And they're looking at all the other type of content from there. And I know you're going to see a shift because we're already seeing the shift, and so it'll be, okay, who is that next creator? So I see amazing writer directors working with some of the most creative people on the planet, which are some of these influencers now, of really tackling this up and coming generation to really be engaged. And I think that there's an awkward period. I think we're in that awkward period, but the data is skewing that younger generation. Where it's skewing is the way they consume things. They're not watching Netflix as much as they did 2 years ago. That the younger generation, they're just not. And it scares the heck out of Netflix. It scares the heck out of all these other platforms, because wherever that young generation's going is where the future is going to be. And that's going
one or two central places, or is it going all over?
It's like the type of content, the Netflix CEO said that they actually fear, a competitor is Fortnite versus Netflix. And it's true. It's like they're going to other things that's taking time that isn't necessarily the entertainment that's providing by that platform. And no, and I'm just saying, and it's just getting more ingrained. I keep a very close eye on Gen Z because that's my job to do that. And then I also have kids that are Gen Z, and they're freaking on TikTok longer than anything else. Or they're watching some YouTuber. They're not binge watching. I think the only show that they binge watched consistently was The Office. And other than that, they really don't care to watch too much, other content like that. So
the platforms that are going to win are the ones that are going to go above and beyond on empowering and better compensating the content creators. Whether that's, long form series, or if it's live streaming, or if it's creating short form content. There's only, there's a couple of different models right now. You have like the YouTube AdSense, model where you can get a rev share with, ad dollars. You have Netflix that, has their model, Amazon, where they pay creators. But, it's kind of like, and I've used this reference before, where, Dave Chappelle went to Netflix and said, hey, I know you can do this, but I don't feel good about you streaming the Dave Chappelle show owned by Viacom CBS. And it's very interesting that Netflix, listened to Dave and they stopped streaming it. And it's because they see the value in the relationship with that creator. And they know that they can do future business with Dave Chappelle. And it's also an amazing message to other content creators out there that Netflix, is going to be, very helpful and empowering and fair to work with. And I think we're going to be seeing that across, all platforms. We're already seeing that, on social media, where YouTube and Twitch and other platforms are paying for exclusivity when it comes to streaming. And when it comes to, content creators that are making content on their platforms. And I think we're just seeing the beginning of that, because there's not millions of creators that are getting these this exclusivity. There's still a huge audience out there of creators and influencers that these platforms need to cater to. And so I think as they start competing and trying to make sure that they have the best place for these content creators, it is going to create some competition and even some decentralization of the platforms. But I also think we're going to get to the point where, a lot of these creators are going to be doing everything. So, I mentioned this before, and Derral, let me know if you want to go deeper into this, but Derral and I have collaborated on a faith-based project, and, it's being successful by, having a long-form series, but also it's built a huge community of millions of followers around it. And I think that's going to keep happening and be something that's much more prominent where, you're going to have to build an audience on a variety of platforms in addition to creating the content.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting time. I think that, earlier on this conversation that we had, we talked about, Chris made this very specific, is like you have to have that social presence to even get known of some of the projects that you're working on. I know that there's a lot of actors in the space that are transforming and really getting involved in social media, and that does make a huge difference too. But like I said, I truly do believe that we're in an awkward period. Because of the transition of money and where it's going to go, because where contracts is, what was assumed going into it, and where's that value coming in? Because like some of these people that have put in their dues and have been able to, get people to go and people will buy tickets to go into these movies. Now it's just like, okay, they're going into a very saturated place. And so what is that next step? And you brought up Dave Chappelle. He's not even freaking on social media. Like he is literally anti-social media, but yet he has that presence, right? And so
that's very interesting, but it is awkward. And, being in this industry, specifically on where we try to empower creators on TubeBuddy or specifically doing product placement and influencer marketing, it's the same business. We're in a lot of the productions out there. And whether, it's a series on a streaming platform or if it's working with TikTok creators, it's the same vision, it's the same business, but they're two different worlds still. And to the point where we have to have dedicated teams that are doing product placement and dedicated teams doing TikTok. We don't overlap them because even though they're very similar, they're different animals. And I think things are going to continue to collide more where it is going to be a lot more the same and much more similar. But whether you're doing product placement in a series or a film or a music video or doing live streaming on twitch.tv or a TikTok video, you're doing the same thing. You're getting, product inside of the content. And you're trying to do it in a very authentic, way that's not too disruptive. But working with a TikTok creator and working with a showrunner or a prop master is a different process. And they're different worlds. And they look at things differently. They look at content differently. They look at monetizing differently. And so I agree. I think that's a really good assessment of saying that this is a really interesting time because there's a lot that's showing of like the potential that's in the entertainment industry, but it's also a very awkward time because it's very difficult to figure out, okay, this is exactly what's going to happen across the board.
Although I think what you're saying, I would just throw out there, and it's been something that I have tried to say to people for years, is you are then giving much more power to creators who are also promoters, people who also understand marketing. And one of the little games that got played in Hollywood, I would say since the 80s, was these companies, the distributors, the marketers, said to the talent, you don't need to worry about that. We do that. And how talent made decisions was based on who was going to market them the best or who was going to support them. But they stayed in the back. They passed it off to the company that was going to market and release it. And now what you're saying, and what I think you're right, you look at somebody like The Rock is a genius at it. He's great at it, right? And I love The Rock. I think he's awesome. And and they're changing the idea, Ryan Reynolds or George Clooney owning tequila and Ryan Reynolds doing a cell phone company. These guys are saying, look, we're a personality in the world. And a lot of it started in hip hop where those guys were looking for money and they're doing vodka and they're doing clothes and and none of their fans cared. They were okay with them making money, right? And I think that that's a new reality for mainstream Hollywood because the one thing that's different about acting or telling stories is there's a certain suspension of disbelief, and there's a certain you're becoming somebody else. So like if you look at my little career, the two biggest guys that I ever worked with were Matt and Ben, and the two of them have very different points of view about social media and about what you're talking about. And more people know about Ben's personal life than they do Matt's. I think that actually gives Matt an advantage in playing parts because you see him in a part and you can say that doesn't immediately fly in the face of who he is. The Rock, on the other hand, in my opinion, basically plays The Rock. I'm going to see The Rock in the CIA. I'm going to see The Rock, okay, now he's going to be with kids. Okay, now he's going to flex up and kick some ass. Now he's going to, but he's The Rock, right? And I think that's, yeah. Right. And the difference is that somewhere in the balance, it's like Leonardo DiCaprio. I don't even know if that guy's married or have kids. I don't have any idea about Leonardo DiCaprio, right? But I'll watch him in different movies. I recently watched Gilbert Grape. The guy's just an unbelievable actor, right? But I think that goes into the movie and television fictional scripted side. And that's why reality television is becoming more popular and whatever, is because people get to be that person all along, right? Like if Tom Cruise set up the Ethan Hunt community, right? That probably wouldn't work because then it would need to be other people. Or like in your faith-based project, it's okay to have a whole community build around that because there's an underlying core belief of the people who support that project, right? But the general Star Wars, like, if Mark Hamill did the Luke Skywalker thing, people would be like, why would I come to Mark Hamill's Luke Skywalker, right? I at least be George Lucas, if not whatever. So I think the thing that's that is making it awkward is this: how does somebody who is telling fictional stories about groups of characters bring in that level of social influence without making it all about themselves? Because I would say somebody like Spike Lee has to some extent hurt his marketability in the mainstream because everybody looks at him as he's going to tell, a black story, or he's going to have a point of view. Oliver Stone's in the same place. And so the question is, on one hand, there's a bunch of projects that Spike Lee's great for. On the other hand, he's not. But if you watch The Inside Man, which is basically a thriller, I mean, Denzel's in it, but it's also Jodie Foster and Clive Owen, and it's a great movie. Spike Lee's a great director. But because he's made himself a bigger persona, which is sort of what you guys are recommending, he is somewhat limited by the persona in a certain world. Chris Nolan, who you guys already talked about, I, again, don't know shit about that guy. Don't know what he's doing. I love his movies. I think he's really good. But if Chris Nolan went out and started doing what The Rock does that hurt Chris Nolan?
Yeah, I don't think it does. I think it's the positioning of it, right? So, because Chris Nolan isn't in front of the camera, he's behind the camera, and so I don't know. Like, I'm interested in his process. I'm interested in what he's doing. I'm interested in all the little details of what he has going on. But I think the aspect would be, is it for an A-list celebrity now? Versus, someone that's going to be discovered. Because at the end of the day, I don't think we'll be having this conversation because people want to know more. And I think the whole comment that you said about, reality, they can be what they want. I think the new stars of future movies and TV are people that are going to have social followings, and they are going to have that persona, and there might be a person here or two, but the question is if they're not going in and are buying a commitment and buying a ticket to go to a movie, or spending the time on whatever it is to watch a TV program, how are they gonna break out? If it's gonna be oversaturated. I
think there's still gonna be a place for a Christopher Nolan in 20 years or in 50 years, and that is gonna 100%. That's gonna be collaborating with wherever these audiences are, and wherever what he's passionate about and creating is gonna align with one of these audiences. And so if that is him collaborating with someone that has 100 million followers and great engagement and distribution, where they can collaborate on doing a project together that can be very, very lucrative. The content is always going to need to be there, and there's still going to be those that are writers, or the prop masters, or the showrunners. All those jobs are still going to be in existence. It's just going to be a different world. And I would probably say there's going to be a lot of different options, even more.
But do you think those people ever become influencers?
If they want to, but there might be. I mean, this is one of those things where I don't know if everyone wants to be an influencer. There's some people who are just artists. They want to create and they want to do something specific. And I think there's going to be a place for them because that is going to be a part of the process in creating film.
Yeah, but they're going to need to be connected. I mean,
they're going to have to be connected. They're going to have to work with those that have a strong distribution or, you know, have a large following or a community that they've been able to develop around or create.
But so the influence could be inside that community of influencers.
Yes.
Like there's a lot of directors, I'll use Ridley again, that actors want to work with. So Ridley doesn't need to have 100 million people following him. He just needs to get Ariana Grande to be in his movie.
Exactly.
Right? And you guys think that will still exist?
I do, 100%.
And Ariana Grande might have a platform where she can distribute it and where they can make way more profits than they were ever making before with other movies.
Yeah, you know, I agree with that. I just think some of this talent is afraid to step out and support other talent, you know? Whereas, again, hip-hop being sort of ahead, you know, with those record labels where Dr. Dre's got Eminem and Eminem's got 50 Cent, you know, that's what I wish would happen in the movie business is, you know, Chris Nolan then brings up somebody and that guy finds somebody and it's the draft effect of people being successful to bring them up the line and let other people know, hey, we think this guy's talented, you know? And I think in some ways, if Chris Nolan or George Lucas or, you know, I don't know, JJ had fallen in love with the guy who did this Night thing on Netflix, that would have been better for that filmmaker's career than Netflix picking up his movie because it got lost in the Netflix thing. Whereas somebody like JJ, or even it's like Usher bringing up Justin Timberlake. I mean, what's his name? Bieber. Is that there's more belief artist to artist than there is company to artist. And that's why I think they also have a lot of value in developing talent.
Well, so it's going to be interesting to see this all develop. But you're right. You like mentioned, you know, there needs to be more people going out there and like taking the risk, you know, to make something like this happen. You know, there's going to have to be a level up when it comes to vision on like what you can accomplish. And a lot of these, you know, artists or influencers or creators, they're going to have to surround themselves with, you know, analysts and operational geniuses to be able to build empires or to build studios. But that's something that I think, you know, The Rock is obviously making plenty of money. He's doing really well. He probably doesn't think he needs to make more, but he's in a position where he could literally own the infrastructure and get, you know, the majority of the profits on productions or films or series that he wants to create.
Yeah, I mean, what he did with that wrestling movie, I don't know if you guys saw it with the young girl.
Yep.
You know, I think it's called Fighting with My Family or something. What's her name? She's a star. Anyway, was awesome. I mean, that's the power of The Rock. He's in it for like 2 minutes. He goes out and he talks about it. It's a world that he relates to, and that it's a you know a WWE story. It's based on a real story. The Rock says, "This is a great story. You guys should check it out," and it becomes a successful movie, right? And it's that way. You know, Oprah could have that power if she wanted to do that more, but I think she goes off and you know does things. But that's where I agree with you guys. The question is that a psychological thing in your head of promoting other people is sort of counterintuitive for some of these people who have been out there promoting themselves for, you know, 20 years?
You know, some, but I think we're seeing a difference with this next generation of content creators. You have, for example, someone that we talk about a lot here, and he's shown up on the program several times. You know, who Derral, you know, has collaborated with and does a lot of producing around is Mr. Beast. He's someone that really has this huge vision, and he wants to accomplish a lot, from starting a hamburger chain to you know a very successful merch line to, you know, in just a year, you know, building one of the most successful gaming channels on YouTube. And you know, so there is going to have to be another level of ambition, but also another level of being very data driven. And because that's just going to be something that, you know, people are going to have to look at the data. They're going to have to, you know, do a risk assessment and say, okay, do I want to put resources here? Am I going to get a return? And and so it's going to be interesting. And as we've talked about this a little bit last time, we had you on, there's going to be a lot with technology and data and AI that are going to be very helpful, when it comes to the process of prioritizing, content that you want to be working on or seeing what content is going to be successful. Now, you and I actually had a back and forth on our first episode, on our first time together on what is AI going to be able to do. Now, it will not be able to predict everything. We've been very fortunate to have breakthroughs where we've been able to, last year in 2019, we were able to predict 10 out of the top 10 new pilots that came out. And then, this last year is way different, and we predicted 8 out of the top 10, which is still very impressive because no one else was able to predict that high of amount. However, there are always going to be outliers, and you said something like this, where you're like, well, there's always going to be a creative genius that's going to think about it themselves, and it's going to be super viral, and no one's going to be able to predict that. And that's true. You can take that data and put it into the feedback loop, so you start training the AI to be able to understand those anomalies. But I'll give one example: Tiger King. That was not on our map. We had 0 predictions around Tiger King. And it was a series that ended up being crazy successful. And then, we took all of that. We're like, okay, let's add that data into our algorithms, and hopefully we can, predict the next, Tiger King if it's going to surface. But where do you think, Chris, you being a content creator and being a very successful one, you've done some of the most iconic projects out there. Good Will Hunting. I mean, that is just a film that has just positively influenced this world, and it's up there. I put it up there on my favorites, like with The Godfather. Where do you think you're going to be more empowered with technology and data, for future projects?
Well, it's interesting because you're right. I have disagreed. I guess for me, I have a different definition now of AI than it's this predictive thing. It's more that it's great to know how humans behave, right? My issue with AI is that it's still a little bit looking back at how we used to behave. And one of the things that and Tiger King may be a version of this, I don't know, but there's a little part of Hollywood, at least, probably creation of content, let's say, in all of them, gaming, books, movies, television, music, where the humans who are really good at it are a little bit ahead of the curve, right? They don't know necessarily, or the data might not be perfect, but they look at it and say, people would like this. And I think that will exist out there, and they'll have the benefit now of having all this data, right? That they see what it is. But what I think is much more important, which I think could be really valuable, is I think all of these streaming services are going to land in a world, except if they do something like Amazon where they have lots of channels. All of the channels per se, and I don't mean like ABC and CBS. What I mean is just the idea that there's a programming infrastructure, are going to have a demographic they talk to. And I think what you said about Chris Nolan is right, is that the AI and the way they manage their humans that they talk to will create an environment where when a creative person gets interested in something else, right? Like Batman Begins is totally different than Dunkirk, right? And I love that Chris Nolan made both those movies, right? And he should be allowed to go out and focus on different things, and the point is, what he's going to need and what AI is going to really help is you want to reach the people who might like that movie. And the thing that's wildly changed is it used to be nationwide, everybody goes, whatever. I think that's over. I think we are at the stage now where when you start a project, you have to start in on which demographic you're going after. And these groups will be focused on those people, right? There is a difference between content, between age groups, between demographics. And if you can amass and really cater, that will also help. I'm going for this group of people. Like, I had an experience. I made a horror movie called Joyride a few years ago, and we went out and tested, which used to be the version of AI, was you go out and you do theater testing, right? And now I know AI is way more complicated and way deeper than just doing an audience survey, but it's the same concept of let's see how people react to all these different variables. And Joyride tested great. They have quadrants, age, gender, that kind of thing. And it tested great in 3 of them. And it tested so well in 3 of them that the studio decided we should do some more work to get it to test as good in the 4th quadrant. And as filmmakers, we were like, that's a bad idea, because the 4th quadrant was women over 30. Well, boys under 25 and women over 30 have about 2 crossovers total in the whole world, right? So to make a horror movie that's going to apply to both, we're going to lose some of the boys under 25 if we go women over 30, right? And it's a horror movie. So on average, the people who are going are the boys under 25. Right? So the fact that we got women under 25, we should be dancing in the street, lock this up, be done, let's get it out. Right? But they were obsessed with all 4 quadrants on a horror movie. Right? I don't think anyone in a million years would do that today. They wouldn't sit down and say, we got it. They would actually say, which quadrant is it? Can we get lucky? Same with American Pie. We got girls. Girls like that. Right? And it was part of the title and the way the movie played. But the point is that the AI and the data, I think, will actually make things a little more specific for different demographics. And what we have to do is be way better at defining those demographics in a much more detailed way than just gender and age. Right? Because there are older people who like the Marvel movies, like me. Right? There are younger people who are all for watching Ammonite, right? Which I couldn't possibly bring myself to watch. There are still people who like to cry. I mean, we found those people with Manchester by the Sea when I would have told you on this show, this is the worst idea for a movie ever. Dead children, a kid who doesn't, a lead character who doesn't actually change. The whole thing was bad, but there were people who still like that. And Amazon, to their credit, was able to find them, and it actually turned out to be financially successful for everybody. The point is, when you're a guy like me, where you start at the very beginning of a project where AI and data could be really helpful, is you say, who am I making this for? If you look at my own career, you would never say the audience for American Pie or Joyride is the same audience for Manchester by the Sea. In fact, Good Will Hunting's probably closer to Manchester by the Sea. Then you get Adjustment Bureaus a little closer in the middle, and then but the point is, if we could have that conversation in an educated way before you have to sign up, and you didn't have all these platforms trying to cater to everyone, right? You can make a little bit more specific programming that audience would love. And then if you got a crossover, great, right? And you can also build the economics around that audience. So you don't have to always build the economics around the macro audience. Right? I mean, people talk about Manchester by the Sea as success. People talk about Good Will Hunting. Good Will Hunting made, triple the amount of money at Manchester by the Sea, but it was a different time where it was all based on national or international worldwide success. That's far less now because there's all these different avenues. And it wasn't because, now again, I don't think Goodwill is as sad as Manchester, but the point is that the general spoke is the expectations were less, right? If you can make $10 million off a $5 million movie, great, right? But, so I think the AI can really make better content for audiences who are already going to like it. And that creators who are making stuff know intellectually that they're going after a specific. It's why somebody like Tyler Perry is he knows he's going after a central audience. And if it happens to carry over, great, right? But if it doesn't, he's still fine.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. When it comes down, and I agree. Like when there's a specific community and there's someone that has a lot of influence in that community and they're going to create content for that community, it's going to be a lot easier to be able to model out and figure out, okay, how well is this content going to do? Rather than just creating a piece of content and just hoping that you get good distribution for it. However, with the latter, which is more of a traditional path, you're talking about AI and data. I say AI a lot because that encompasses a lot of things that we're doing, from computer vision to audio to Bayesian models to machine learning models. We do a lot of different things when we're looking at the data. And what's interesting is when we are looking at new opportunities, there's a couple of things that stick out. One, the unstructured data is really important. A synopsis is really important, or a script, when making a prediction if it's going to be successful. So we're able to have our AI look at thousands and thousands of different films and productions of what has been successful, and a lot of it comes to the synopsis. It also comes down to the correlations of who's going to be behind the project, who are the producers, who are the directors. Of course, the cast makes a huge difference, and so there's a lot of different things that you have to do and you have to look at in order to make a prediction. And our predictions, we've been very fortunate to have them be very, very good and have high accuracy rates. And then you have outliers, and we use those outliers to train the model, because sometimes those outliers are going to crash, sometimes they're going to just explode. But I think we're going to get to the point where, as we're just at the very, very beginning stages of being able to make these types of predictions, but I think it's getting to the point where someone will be able to watch a film or a show or a series, and we're going to be able to analyze with biodata how they're reacting to that show or to that series, and there might be able to be alternate storylines or alternate endings as a result on how people are reacting. That sounds crazy. That sounds like something that's way too futuristic, but I think those days are coming sooner than we all realize, because the technology is there. It's just, we have to be ready for it.
Well, and look, there's always going to be people who love, you used the term way early in this conversation of art, right? And some people will say art is personal, right? So they lose a little bit of their interest in projects if somebody says, oh, we did all the biometrics and we did all the AI and we made this story, right? Maybe we're not going to tell people that. But I think there's also going to be, at some point, great storytellers telling stories will still be interesting because there is talent involved. But I think that it's you're totally right about that. And I think what will happen is it will start to become phased in, just like there were filmmakers who would pretend, I don't want my movie tested. I don't want to know what the little 400 people in the valley, think. And then there were filmmakers like, I definitely want to know that because I want to see what they react to and what they do. Just like some people who run networks right now are still doing pilots and some aren't, right? Because they think there's something they see. But I think you're right that I just am not a believer, even though I'm an old guy in this demographic, of data hurts you in any way, right? Except in the way I just pointed out in the Joyride example, where if you mysteriously think you can get everybody, there's an old saying, you can't please everybody all the time, right? And so if people early in the process could say this is a piece of content aimed at these people, and technology allows for all of the people that might like that content to find it, that's what filmmakers should be looking for, is the match of the people that find the audience that they think they're making stuff for, right? And that's what will really change the business, is when we don't have to make things that somehow are going to appeal to everyone.
Right. No, absolutely. Well, Chris, it's been fantastic to be able to have you on here again. I've been very fortunate to work with you, and executives that work with me. Like Caressa has been working with you for a long time, and you really are a thought leader when it comes to entertainment, and that's why we love to always call you up and take your time, right, and pick your brain and all that. And thank you so much for coming on here. It's one of those things where, again, taking it back to like the business that I focus on in Ben Group. Product placement is just something that's been happening for 40 years. But with all this stuff that is happening, and with things becoming a lot more data driven and decentralized, it's making this type of business explode. We will always remember those iconic placements. Like, for example, you mentioned James Bond. We got James Bond to stop drinking a martini to drink a Heineken, a couple of times. We got him to start driving a BMW. And this is something that's going to become even more and more, I think, the future of entertainment. But it's going to be it's happening now at such a high quantity. We're literally getting thousands and thousands of integrations and product placements a year. Where like, those days of feature films where everyone knows about them, it's going to be a lot more personalized and individualized and decentralized, where it's going to be different communities or different audiences excited about different pieces of content.
Well, I think also, Ricky, you guys are in the middle of it. I know you don't like to jump into content choices per se yet with your clients and other people, but the thing that advertisers, and I've said this before, and I'll just end with this comment, is that the storytelling business, whatever the format, whatever the delivery technology, has the biggest change on a macro level over the last 2 years we've been talking about or whatever, is it's become a consumer products business. It is no longer got any special place in the market. It no longer has any special ownership over people's mind share, as Derral said about his kids. They don't
can't be controlled anymore.
Right. They don't control it. So now they are competing against all these other people who are way ahead of them in consumer marketing. And a group of the people who are way ahead of them are your clients. Right? So like Heineken per se could also give people data about what else they like if they're their demographic that want to buy a Heineken. So you tell them they like James Bond. You tell them they like, and also how to market to that audience and talk to that audience. And I think that that's a very valuable thing where you go in the same way I'm saying you want to find people in the world that are already predisposed to like your content. I think you also want to find brands that are going to attach you to that audience also, so that they become marketing hooks, just like having Ariana Grande is the same thing as having a type of car or a type of beer or whatever. So I just think you guys are way more positioned now to go beyond the prop master, that producers like me and other people like me should be calling you up, figuring out what demographics of brands are similar to the audience this product is going after. Right? Because they will matter as much, in the long term of the feeling of that brand, right? And that emotional connection to the brand will matter to a piece of content as much as a star does.
Right. Well, Chris, thank you so much for joining us today. And everyone that's tuning in, thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to subscribe, whatever platform you're on. Be sure to follow us. Like this, video or this audio recording, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you so much.